I'm about as rational and skeptical of the supernatural as they come. Nevertheless, I've experienced countless weird events that I tend to just dismiss since I have no way of reproducing them consistently, and when they do occur, even if they're witnessed, because they can't be reproduced, they create more of a "holy shit, that was weird" type of story for the day, than a sudden belief in the supernatural. That's what these are. My "holy shit, that was weird" stories. The first is that I've heard people's thoughts on two occasions that stand out clearly. The first time and the most recent time come to mind. When I say I heard them, it was like I hallucinated them speaking. I wasn't looking at them and yet responded to their thoughts at the time as if they said them out loud. I actually heard them speak with my ears, or it seemed like I did. Obviously, everyone involved was surprised and confused. I tried to think about any similarities among the times that this happened and haven't been able to really find a true X factor. I get the usual intuition where I know the answers to questions before I ask them and things like that, but these times were different because there was an actual sensory hallucination. The next is, I've had enough dreams come true that it caused me to seriously consider why they were coming true. Obviously, I have seemingly meaningless dreams mixed in, but there's a certain type of dream that when I have it, it feels more like I'm visiting a potential future on the timeline before waking up in the present. It's not that they're especially vivid dreams, in fact they're mundane, but there's details that are present that I notice and remember when I wake up. Then, when that actual scenario occurs, I'm like, I've been here and seen this before, like remembering the future. My best guesses of how these types of dreams happen is that in some cases, the dreams themselves were guiding me to make them a reality on a subconscious level, and in others, my brain was maybe just taking variables that I encounter in my daily life and simulating likely scenarios I might experience. In the latter case, if my brain simulates, let's say, 20 scenarios in my dreams with minor details shifted around, it's likely that I'll inevitably come across a scenario that seems familiar. In one of my dreams though, I was stabbed with a big boar-looking spear on the left of my body in the middle of my rib cage. Pain actually woke me up. To this day, 8 years later, I have a phantom pain there. A recent one, and definitely memorable. The girl I'm dating now never had seizures before in her life. Coincidentally, she started having them a couple months after we started dating. Scary as hell in their own right. Just my luck. She got on medication, everything was good. Then one night, she had the mother of all seizures. I called 911 as usual, got her on her side, and waited for her to come to. Well, the seizing stopped, and so did everything else. This was different than the other times. To this day, I swear this girl died. Her tongue had that lifeless hang to it. Her eyes were staring vacantly into nothing. Her whole complexion was ghostly. Blue lips and the like are common when someone has a seizure. That wasn't this. I'm shouting her name, stunned, shaking her. This was about 20 to 30 seconds, maybe longer. At this point, I'm looking at her and I stand up, put my hands on my head, and I'm like, oh no, holy fuck, oh no. Then in my head, I had this moment of clarity. It was like time stopped, like I got sucked out of my body and went to this quiet, dark, cosmic place. I thought, this girl is 22 years old. She's been pretty sheltered her whole life. She's lived a good, simple life. She's finally starting to enjoy life and see the bigger world, and she goes out like this? Too cliche. Pointless. One last time I called her name, shoved her, and boom, she jolted back to life screaming. I mean, screaming. Everything came back to life, but she wasn't herself. She didn't seem aware of anything, and obviously I first thought, oh no, she has brain damage. Paramedics and her parents arrived, and we couldn't calm her down or communicate with her. What sticks out in my mind was one paramedic saying, "This isn't a seizure." They brought her to the hospital in critical condition. Followed behind, and by the time I got there, she was seemingly coming to. She later told me she didn't recall screaming at all. She remembers seeing everyone in the room and trying to call out to us, but we weren't responding. It didn't seem like we could hear her. There's more to it, but I'm basically just typing this stream of consciousness as I remember it. The next couple of days, I would wake up in the middle of the night, simply not be able to sleep, and I would go for drives trying to figure out what happened that night. It still sticks with me, but for at least a month after, I was really shaken up by the whole thing. To make matters more bizarre, myself and her friends noticed a distinct change in her personality and mannerisms, like she came back as a different person. Not in a bad way, but definitely different. She grew her hair out, dyed it, started cursing more, seemed to get sharper in her senses and less naive. Her sense of humor was different. She started dressing differently. I jokingly started referring to her as Beric Dondarrion. She seems better now and hasn't had a seizure since, but that night definitely changed me as well, and I'll likely never forget it, for better or for worse. I saw a shadow person. When I was about 17, I was at my friend's apartment building, which his parents own. He had an apartment to hang out in on the top floor and used to go to the roof to smoke. One night, we were about to go up, but I had to pee, so I told him I'd meet him up there. After I was done, I went to the stairs to the attic portion that was connected to the roof. There were no lights, so we always used our phones to guide us. It was an old building and the attic was creepy and cluttered at the time. As I made my way to the roof door, I saw a shadow pass by me. I followed the direction it went, thinking it was my friend. He kept saying that I knew it was him and to stop playing around. It passed me a few more times when I heard my friend's voice from downstairs. He got a call from his girlfriend and was in another room talking to her the whole time. I have no idea what that shadow figure was, but it really freaked me out. I told my friend what happened and that I did not want to go back up there. A couple things for people to consider that have been mentioned when I've told this story before. It was not my own shadow, since the only light up there was coming from my phone, which I held in front of me. Also wasn't someone that just broke in, because that door locks from the outside, and the next day my friend went to check when it was daytime and there was no one there. Growing up in a really old house, we had lots of weird things happen. My family still talks about the spirits, or whatever they were, but they mostly seem to have calmed down as we renovated more and more of the house. Kind of like they felt it was less and less their place to be still, I think. Never menacing things, just odd, but terrifying sometimes. Benign things like the dryer turning on, which my mom actually called her helper spirit because our machine was kind of old. Sometimes it had to be run twice to get things dry. Two instances always stand out to me that I'll never forget though. One time I was playing in my room, nothing unusual at all. We had this cheap fake wood shelf that had books and toys and knickknacks all over it. I was playing somewhat in front of it when it exploded. I don't mean that like a bomb, but I don't know how else to explain it. Everything just started coming, flying off the shelves and flying everywhere. Oddly enough, not a single thing hit me. I remember being mad at my parents after they heard the noise and came to see what had happened. They didn't believe me and just told me to clean it up. Second story happened to my brothers as well. It's a weird shared experience that was ongoing. Oftentimes, we'd see shadow people in the house. Sometimes together, but one seemed to visit me quite often when I had a bedroom in the room that seemed to be the most active or whatever. We all shared that room for some time and had different stories. There always appeared to be a shadow man standing in the doorway watching me. No features or anything, just a dark outline of a man. Sometimes, if I closed my eyes and opened them again, it would be closer. Some nights I would just sit there and stare. He never moved while I was watching. It's giving me the shivers now just thinking about it again. I'd stare for what might seem like hours until I must have finally passed out, looking for any imperfections to let me know if it was just a shadow or my mind playing tricks. And because I didn't want it to come any closer, I only ever closed and opened my eyes enough times to have it near the edge of the bed once. I remember being scared and screaming for my parents often, but I'm not sure I really felt threatened ever, just cold. That could be from the crappy windows in a 100-year-old house too. Anyway, I remember when we finally got around to renovating that room, we ripped up the carpet and underlay to find shitty black and white linoleum tile stuff. Near the door off to the side was this weird human-sized stain. It wasn't unusual finding water damage and stuff when we were doing renos, and I hadn't seen or even thought about the shadow man for a very long time when we ripped up that floor. Instantly I knew that was something, but it's weird because it didn't feel like I thought of it. It just seemed like I was told that as soon as I saw it. I've had weird experiences my whole life. Here's a couple that stick out. When I was a kid, there was a night when I wasn't feeling well, and I woke up to an old woman in a blue dress pulling my covers up and stroking my hair. For some reason, I didn't feel scared or anything. I asked my mom about it the next day. She found a picture of my great-grandmother, long deceased, in the blue dress that she was buried in. It was definitely her. I used to live in a foreign country that had experienced a lot of war and violence, especially against indigenous people, and I knew my apartment was haunted. Regularly at night, empty water bottles would be tossed around my bedroom. The lights would go on in the middle of the night, footsteps walking, doors shutting, etc. I went to the local market to get some sage or something, and the woman who sold charms wouldn't sell any to me, saying I was cursed to walk among them. Ended up moving a couple weeks later, and it stopped. I moved into an apartment about 5 years ago with my boyfriend, which also had unusual activity. One night, I was home alone, on the phone with my best friend. All of a sudden, the TV turned on max volume, scaring the crap out of me. I screamed, turned off the TV, and was explaining to my friend what had happened when across the apartment, both the bedroom and bathroom doors slammed shut. It was winter. There were no windows open. I immediately left the house and returned the next day. A ton of other stuff happened there. I can get into it if anyone is interested. But we did a little ghost hunting once we left, and the apartment was empty of furniture. We got responses, and I have them recorded. I live in the bottom of a fourplex, so my bedroom window is about aligned with the sidewalk outside. I have drapes on the window so I can barely see out of it, mainly just silhouettes and lights. I woke up in the middle of the night a few weeks ago. While trying to go back to sleep, I noticed a faint light passing the window every few minutes. A little more time passes and I glance at the window again and see the light just sitting still for a few seconds, then dims away. The next morning I didn't give it much thought. But when I went to take the trash out, I checked my window, and sitting on the sill was my cell phone. Guess I wasn't clear enough. My phone was on the outside of the windowsill. It wasn't the fact that my phone was out there that freaked me the most. It was seeing the light pace across several times. It just didn't make sense to me. My older brother was able to get a hold of me while I was living in Hawaii, which in itself was a supernatural occurrence. "Hey, calling about Tony." Upon hearing him say that, I thought to myself, I hope he is okay. In that moment, near the beach in Hawaii, I saw two shooting stars shoot in parallel. And then my brother said, "He has died." Funny thing is that I was very calm, even though I had heard the words. I knew he was alright. His best friend Eric woke up to milk his cows in Tillamook, Oregon, the morning of Tony's death. When he got the call from my older brother about Tony, Luke said, "Eric, calling about Tony." Eric said, "Yeah? He was just here helping me milk the cows." Luke said, I don't know how. Tony died last night." Sunday after he had passed, my mom and sisters were at church. Mom saw Tony at the front of church near the altar. Tony said to Mom, "Wow, this is cool. I can see you, but you can't see me. Well, I've got to go." Then disappeared. I believe there is an afterlife. When I was in high school, I used to get together with some friends to play music. The friend's house that we met at was at a cul-de-sac up on a hill. So there was a flight of steps leading up to the front door. After jamming for a while, I decided to head home at about 9 or 10 p.m. I had parked my car on the opposite side of the cul-de-sac from the house. There weren't any street lamps except for one or two a little bit down the road. When I made it to the bottom of the steps, I saw a really large, dark dog standing underneath one of these street lamps. I just assumed it was a neighbor's dog and continued to my car, but when I glanced back at it, it was sprinting towards me. I ran to my car, clumsily unlocked it, just like the movies, and as soon as I got in, flipped on the lights. By the time I got in, the dog should have been right next to my car, or at least nearby, but there was no trace. I even circled the cul-de-sac looking in the trees for this huge dog, but I never saw it. When I asked my friend later, he told me that none of his neighbors owned a dog, and besides, few of them were even home. He lived in a neighborhood that was primarily second homes. It scared my pants off and I never went to his house again after dark. When I was in the 6th grade, we lived in a house that definitely seemed haunted. Nothing was ever terrifying, but it was strange. We used to store our pots and pans on the top of the fridge. We would often hear crashing as if all these pots had fallen down, only to walk in the kitchen to find them where they were supposed to be. Once, I was in the kitchen with my mom. She had her back turned to me at the stove while I was at the counter. Then right from the center of the kitchen, someone said, "Mom," quite loudly. She turned around to ask me, "What?" but saw that I was shocked. That spooked us. But the weirdest thing that happened there was the inexplicable disappearance of the crisper drawer from the fridge. I came home from vacation to find the drawer missing, but all the contents still in the fridge. We at first thought someone may have broken in and stolen some food, but there was beer and other relatively enticing items in there that were untouched. Later, when we moved out, my dad found the crisper drawer in an obscure part of the garage. When I was about 18 years old, I often walked home from my friend's house at night. The walk was about 5 kilometers, or 3 miles, through rural area in northern Germany. No lights, only one street in the area, no cars. Everything silent except a few animals in the wood. Sometimes I was a bit afraid when walking home alone through the woods at night, hearing cracking nearby, especially when we saw zombie movies before. But one night, something strange happened. For the blink of an eye, everything was bright as day. No sound, just brightness. I was not blinded. I could see anything around me, but no source of light, and the light vanished as fast as it came. This happened around 3 times that night. I also ruled out lightning because it was a clear night, and also the weather report said nothing about it. I asked some of my friends and parents, but they were giving me odd looks and also had no idea. I knew that there were some old army outposts around, including a tank graveyard, but they were all closed many years ago. I still have no idea. Six years ago, my wife and I were laying down in the back room watching movies. We were the only ones in the building that night as everyone else was out of town on vacation. My bedroom is on the first floor adjacent to the gangway in the backyard. As we're watching movies, the motion sensor lights went off in the gangway. I thought nothing of it. Could have been wind blowing leaves through the gangway, as so often happens. The light turns off, but 5 minutes later, it turns on again. And this time I look out the back window to see if anyone's in the yard. And I didn't notice anything except for the fact that the night was actually really still. No trees blowing the water on the pool or reflective sheet. Nothing special, nothing there. It happened one more time and this worried me. So I got up, went through the back door down the stairs, and checked the yard to see if anyone was there. And there was nothing, so I made my way back to the door, and as I turned around to lock it, I suddenly felt every hair on my body stand up. It was the overwhelming sensation that I was being watched, so I turned to look up the stairs expecting to see something looking back at me, but there's nothing there. But I still feel a presence. Now this makes me anxious because I have to walk up those same stairs to get back into my room, which I do slowly, very slowly. And as I answer my wife, she asks me what's wrong. She can tell something happened, but there's nothing I can say because nothing did happen. I laid back down in bed with her, put the movie on, and after some time, the most startling thing happened, for which I still have no logical explanation. My bed is positioned adjacent to the gangway wall, and the first floor is some 10 feet above the ground. Out of nowhere, there was a loud audible and physical bang, like someone just took a sledgehammer to the outside wall. It hit so hard that the bed even shook. I turned to look at my wife. We were just completely confused, a little scared and not going back outside to see what it was. Since then, other things have happened. She claims to have seen a little boy in our apartment peeking from around the corner towards the back of our place. I saw the same thing, but I could not tell if it was a boy or a girl. Couldn't even tell if it looked human. The only thing I saw was something peeking from around the corner, and when I went to make eye contact, it dashed away. There's been weird dragging noises across the floor at night. It seems to move in different parts of the ceiling above us. Items have been thrown from the top of our fridge or from our pantry where we store our goods, but nothing violent. One of the funniest things is that when we're not home and our dog is left alone, my parents, who live below us, say that they can hear the dog running back and forth, his toys being thrown back and forth as he chases them. A few years back, I spent some time traveling and was living in Istanbul with a couple of roommates in a 2-story apartment. slept in a basement room, which I shared with another girl, and our guy roommate slept just down the hall. I've had night terrors before and know they're scientific and don't really believe in the supernatural, but one night in that apartment, I woke up at 3:01 a.m. as I saw the alarm clock and felt an evil presence in the room. There was this black shadow thing with glowing red eyes crouched next to my bed, just staring at me, and I was paralyzed. I felt a sickening sense of doom and tried desperately to reach for my phone, anything to wake up, to move, to make it go away. I'm not religious, but I started praying frantically. Finally, at 3:10, I felt it leave the room, and I could breathe again and move. I was wide awake and didn't sleep the rest of the night. I was so shaken. It sounds like a typical night terror, except for the next morning at breakfast, I was casually munching some Cheerios when my guy roommate, who lived down the hall from me, plops down and is like, "Oh man, had the worst nightmares last night." I woke up at like 3:15 a.m. and saw this ball of black with red eyes in my room, just glaring at me in fury. I was paralyzed and couldn't move. It was the worst. I told him what happened to me and we both were really freaked out. Slept with the light on quite a few nights after that. About 14 years ago, I was driving through Texas on my way to Denver in a car I had loaded up with my possessions. At around 1 a.m., somewhere just north of Amarillo, my car started to overheat and I pulled into the only gas station remotely close. It was also closed, but I thought I'd bide some time and limp my car somewhere down the road. Other than this gas station, there was nothing and no one as far as I could tell. No cars on the highway. It was just really dark out with the lights all turned off and really quiet. After a while, the headlights of a car appeared, and as it came by, it slowed down and pulled into the station. The driver was a young guy, blonde hair. He rolled down his window, and without looking directly at me, he asked if I needed help, or even a ride. Right away, I had a really eerie feeling. Also, the solitude didn't help. I was really polite and told him I was cool. My car had a problem, but I had something figured out and I'd be fine. The kid said, "Sounds good, take it easy," and drove off, while still not making eye contact. My car was still really hot, so I continued to wait it out. After a while, the guy came back and asked me again. Gave him a little more detail about my plan because I didn't want him thinking I was trying to mess with the station. Just buying time and I'd be on my way. Again, no eye contact and he pulled away. After about another 20 minutes or so, and just as I was gonna get ready to move on, the kid drives back in. This time he asked me again if I needed help, but after I said thanks but no thanks, I noticed he was really getting agitated. Also, at this point the kid turned towards me. I could see this guy had no iris or pupils. His eyes were both solid white. Also, I had this sense of dread and fear that I can't say I've ever felt in my life. At the same time, he turned to me too. He was in the middle of telling me I deserved this for driving a Japanese car, and that I was some kind of asshole for not letting him help me. At this point, I got in my car and noped out of there. He followed me for a bit out of the station, but turned around after about a mile. This happened when I was living in Indonesia to set the scene. If anyone on the minute off chance knows this woman, or someone has told you this happened to them, please do pipe up. It's obsessed me since it happened, and I think about this woman every day. So, we had a house for a while that was a bit like a wedding cake. On top was a little snug nook room, a bit like the ship's crow's nest. You could see for ages around. We were in the middle of an empty, square patch of land, and it backed onto an unused field. Big, flat, open, nowhere to hide. No trees lining it, just more flat fields and then a tall back wall. A wall of about 4 foot high separated the field and my house. One day, late afternoon kind of time, I'm up there just relaxing and I hear these blood-curdling screams. Help me, help me. All of that. A woman, probably Australian or Kiwi, screaming in English. Never heard anything like it. From my nest, I can see her running across the field at the back, kind of limping. Pretty sure she was bloodied. Fucked up either way. She was about halfway through it when I saw her. Big field. I run down to the ground floor and towards the field. She was gone. No sign of her at all. It took me all of about a minute, if that. I was gunning it down there to get to the field, but she had just vanished. Nowhere to be seen. Unless Usain Bolt was pursuing her, it is incredibly unlikely someone came into the field, grabbed her, and pulled her back out without me having seen them. Pretty much impossible, really. I sent my house security out to look for her. I stayed in the field looking, and they went towards where she came from and over the wall she had to come over to get into the field. It was an unused holiday villa, and they found a sandal and a bit of blood. Nothing else. There was blood on the wall where she climbed over, but nothing going the other way. So I know I didn't imagine it or make it up. I called the police and they came and had a look, and they also found nothing. Posters went up and stuff. Nobody got back to us or anything. Luck only knows what happened when I was coming downstairs, but I know it can't have been good. Still freaks me out. About 10 years ago, I was at a relative's house, a cottage in a small Michigan coastal town, for my summer vacation. She was almost completely deaf. Without hearing aids, she was completely deaf. Because of her impairment, she had a security system that flashed lights and called her home phone, which also had a light, in addition to a sound alarm. This is important later. I had gone out to see the 4th of July carnival and arrived home at 11 o'clock. My relative went to sleep at 8 every night at the latest. When I came in, I turned off the alarm, essentially signed myself in, and turned it back on again, like I did every time I came home late. Poured myself a glass of water and walked upstairs. Now, upstairs there was a long hallway. At the end of it was the door to a patio overlooking the backyard. We never used it because it wasn't up to code. The house was built in the late 1800s, and many aspects weren't worth the money it would cost to fix them. So there was a decorative, antique chair that was propped up against the door to the back patio. When I walked in that night, the chair was propped against my bedroom door instead, leaned underneath the doorknob as if to keep someone from exiting. I bolted from my relative's room to find her fast asleep. Her guard dog was also asleep. I woke my relative up and she put in her hearing aids. She called the alarm company and they had no record of anything besides her setting the alarm at 6:30 and my entrance at 11. They called the police anyway. When the cops arrived, they moved the chair and attempted to open my bedroom door. It was locked. The doorknob was original to the house, and there was no key for it. So the cops and I walked out to the front balcony and used my key to open the sliding doors. Everything was as it should have been, and when we opened the door from the inside, it wasn't even locked. The cops searched the entire house and found nobody, and nothing missing. I have no idea why there was a chair barricading my bedroom door and why it appeared locked when the lock wasn't even turned. The police sent for a fingerprinting kit and they found no fingerprints on the chair, not even my relatives. Nobody knew why. I had trouble sleeping in that room after that. The police kept an undercover cop outside for a week since my relative was a beloved member of the community. Nothing fishy happened. A few other creepy things happened in that home, if anyone is interested. One night, my neighbors and I were out on the pontoon sharing stories about the area and our homes. Our houses were on a stretch of land bought out by professionals in Detroit and Minneapolis who decided to all build vacation homes together. My relative's house was built by a doctor from Detroit. One night after the family had finished supper, the mother couldn't find their youngest daughter. They sent out a search party and found nothing. 2 nights later, they found her body washed up on a nearby Indian reservation island. The kicker was that the island was upstream from the house. Almost everyone who lived on her street have claimed to see her. This 4-year-old in a long petticoat, wandering down the street. One woman claimed to see her trying to open our front door, about 20 years before she told me. Very creepy. I had a healthy fear of a few parts of the house. There was a dumb waiter that had been sealed up and later opened and turned into a laundry chute. Once my cousin looked down jokingly during a midnight game of hide and seek and saw a face looking up at her. There was a back bedroom that was originally servants' quarters. We turned it into a guest room and nobody liked to sleep there. We had a cable installed in every room, and in that room the channel would switch every half hour to static and then back again. Everyone the cable company sent out was equally baffled. One of them joked that our house was marked as haunted on the service notes. Eventually we just took the television out of the room. The weirdest thing was in my bedroom. In the late 1990s, my relative bought the home from the daughter of the family who had lived there for previous 50-odd years. Her uncle was a schizophrenic, and in the 1970s he lived in my room. When my relative moved in, she had the cedar paneling in the closets removed and replaced. When the old paneling was removed, it was covered in newspaper clippings, mostly local, some national, all featuring disappearances and murders, and some interviews with celebrities and photographs of celebrities. We assumed this was normal, a form of insulation or prep for paneling, but of course not in this weird-ass house. Turns out that collage was once an art therapy favored for schizophrenia and other disorders, and the uncle was encouraged to paste pictures on the closet walls, but not on his bedroom walls, which to this day feature wallpaper installed in the 1920s. When a piece of the wallpaper started peeling, my relative had her handyman paste it back up in order to make it look clean. He peeled it off further to reapply it. Underneath the wallpaper strip was writing, a lot of it. Things that make sense when associated with schizophrenia, but terrifying otherwise. Get out, they can hear me, etc. I was understandably terrified of it in a combination with the chair episode in my first comment. There were also lots of hidden nooks and crannies. The corner of my closet slid out to reveal a hiding spot. There was a tiny door in the kitchen that led to absolutely nothing. We turned it into a pantry, but once we put shelving in the door, it just wouldn't open anymore. We sealed it with caulk and paint and ignored it. The garage in the backyard had a cellar below that had a concrete poured in sometime during the 1950s. The dogs would stand near the cellar door and bark if the garage door was open to them. This is as much as I can remember right now. I hope you feel as creeped out as I do when I think of that house. To me about 6 years ago. A couple of friends and I decided to go out into the woods and build a base camp. We brought axes, machetes, fuel, and a tent. We walked deep into the woods and spent all day cutting down trees and building a makeshift fence. Being idiots, as it became dark, we realized we had no way to see. We started a fire, and I realized if we pour some fuel into a small can, we can light the fumes at the top and create a torch. We made several torches and placed them in the surrounding woods. It got very dark and we needed more logs for the fire, so I was about 20 meters from our camp and I could hear my friends talking. I was swinging at the tree when I felt something hit my back. I froze and turned out around, staring into the dark forest right at the edge of the lights from our torches. I saw nothing and I assumed something had fallen off the tree and hit my shoulder. Right as I was about to swing, something hits me in the back of the head and it hurt enough to make me swing around again. I saw a rock at my feet and I was terrified now. Turning back to walk towards camp, I could hear my friends and see the light from the fire. I kept turning my head looking into the darkness. About halfway to camp, a rock flew by me, missing my head by inches. I ran back to camp and told everyone, and they saw the terror in my face. I sat for a while before more rocks came. Couldn't see anyone or anything, just rocks flying into camp. Needless to say, we didn't sleep, just chilled in the tent holding machetes and keeping a big fire. There were so many rocks in the morning, the thought still terrifies me. We were deep in the woods and no one else should have been out there. I want to say it was a person, but we didn't hear anything or see anything. Just so many rocks. Outdoors person here. I've got a long story for you. I'll put a TLDR at the end if you prefer to skip it. I went out on a backpacking trip to a popular off-roading area. Lots of people like to camp nearby. However, 20 minutes of hiking into the bush and away from the trails and you're into the pristine, untouched wilderness. Was several hours out on the far side of a valley between two very large hills and tiny mountains. Set up camp for the night. Got my fire going, sitting all comfy. Thunk. A rock lands next to me. Huh, that was weird. A while later, thunk. A hard pine cone lands next to me. By this time, I only had one thought. The stories my grandmother used to tell of Sasquatch. How'd she leave Doritos out on her porch and there'd be a pile of blackberries there the next day. I never really took them seriously, but it was all I could think about. I decided to sleep by the fire instead of my hammock, gun in one hand, bear spray in the other, just in case. I made it through to morning, not a lot of sleep, but some. Part of me wanted to pack up and go back, but after breakfast I made the decision. I left a trail map. If anything happens, people know exactly where to come looking. I'm well armed and well supplied. Fuck it, I'm gonna stay and meet Sasquatch or find whoever is messing with me. Night 2. Going against every kind of sense of training for moving through the backcountry, I left food out. A fair distance from my camp, just outside eyeshot, a bag of trail mix. Nothing happened that night. It was quiet, but not too quiet. Well, past midnight I gave up, crawled into my hammock, and went to sleep. In the morning, I checked my trail mix. Gone, unsurprisingly. Night 3. My plan last night. Figure I must have just spooked myself into hearing falling rocks or something. Being alone in the woods does that to you sometimes. You can get so intent on listening you start to hear things that weren't there. So I sit around the fire as evening comes in, eating my remaining trail mix while reading. Thunk. Next to me. Okay, you're just imagining it. Ignore it. Turn the page. Thunk. Turn the page, thunk. This one right on my head. I wouldn't say it hurt, but it was definitely unpleasant. Okay, not imagining it. Stand up. Safety catch on the bear spray off. Flashlight in the other hand as the sun sets. Quick look around. Nothing. Thunk. A rock lands at my feet. Thorough look, slow 360. Try and see anything. Thunk thunk. A rock hits me in the back. Another off the brim of my hat. Put the bear spray down, pick up my rifle, and loudly cycle the action to a chamber around. Right, this has been quite funny, but I'd like to go back to my book. I am armed and I do not take lightly to being assaulted with rocks. No response. I remain still, hoping to hear something. Some sign of a bad practical joke. What felt like an hour passed, more likely only a few minutes. Nothing. More time, still nothing. Fuck it. Whoever it was must have decided to leave me alone. Sit down, go back to my book, only half reading it, keeping one eye up and my ears open to the forest around me. The sun goes all the way down and it's dark. Thunk. Threw my book aside, grabbed my rifle, and was on my feet doing circles around my fire. Couldn't keep still. Somewhere between angry at it being a prank and terrified that it wasn't. Back off. This is your only warning. And that's when shit got real for me. Stone after stone, maybe one every few seconds, from every direction at once. I've never felt so vulnerable. Thunk. One would hit, spin around, lift the rifle up. Empty forest. Thunk. Turn to face it, lift the rifle up. Empty forest. After a solid minute, I could feel myself losing the ability to stay calm. I fired a warning shot into the dirt a few feet in front of me, well within view of my fire just in case. Silence, minus the ringing in my ears. Hours pass. I sat with my back to the fire, figured I might need night vision. Didn't sleep a moment that night. Thinking back, after that shot, didn't think about anything. It was just calm, focused. If I stop paying attention for 1 second, it's going to eat me. Rocks would still land near me, all night. Not often. Often enough. By the time the sun started coming up, I was beyond exhausted. With some light around me, rifle at the ready, I went to retrieve my food from the bear can I'd strung up. It was covered in squirrels. There must have been at least 20. As I approached, they scattered. They hadn't managed to chew through it, but it looked like they'd been at it all night. Opened it right there to pull out some beef jerky. Thunk, 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 thunk. It was the goddamn squirrels throwing rocks at me the whole time. Now it was light out, I could see it. I have never felt so stupid. I posted elsewhere in this thread, but your story reminded me of another odd occurrence. This is around the same time as my other story, and as I had said, I was about 17 to 18 and living in Maine with my cousins. It was summer and kids were out of school. In one of these summer days, my cousins and I tagged along with a group of friends and ended up at a pit party. This is the middle of the day, so broad daylight. We have a fire going and we are drinking and laughing, having a good time or whatever, but I have that feeling of being watched. At one point, I get up to collect more firewood, and as I'm collecting it in the woods, I hear rustling of leaves. And I'm sure it's not me, so I freeze. And a second later, whatever was moving stops too. I scan around but don't see anything. Vegetation can grow pretty thick in the middle of Maine summer. I go back with my firewood and I alert my friends that I think somebody is watching us in the woods. Nobody really pays attention or cares. but I keep scanning the woods and listening. Every once in a while, I can hear something with mass moving through the bush. I'm not overly into paranormal things, so at this point, I'm assuming that this is a nosy person, or possibly the landowner. I try again to no avail to convince my friends we are being watched. Seriously, there is somebody in the woods. They're watching us. A few people start listening now, too. Some of this goes on for a time. Every short while I can hear it move again. I call out, "Hey, who's there?" No answer. I'm pretty creeped out at this point. Like I said, I assumed it to be just a landowner or whatever, but I didn't want to risk it being someone with more malicious intent. Had enough at this point, so I gather my cousins and close friend, and we hightail it out of there. I'm certain there was somebody sulking around the woods. Well, sometime later, I find out that minutes after we left, the cops arrived and busted up the party. So I had a good time gloating about being right to my cousins and friend about somebody being in the woods and basically saving our asses with my vigilance. Like I said, I'm certain there was somebody skulking around in the woods and feel pretty strongly it was this person who called the cops. It was still pretty creepy how sneaky they were and how long they watched us for. The one thing that I have never been able to explain, well, not the only one, but the one that bothers me the most. I was at a Halloween party at my friend's house, which was located on a huge property in the middle of the woods. She lived up near Whiskey Town, so mountains, a lot of trees and fields. Had a couple horses. I arrived that night. There was a gathering of people, maybe 10 at most. We were just talking, mostly outside on the patio. Other than her patio lights, it was dark as fuck beyond the moonlight and stars. One second I'm talking to 3 of the people there on the patio. The next second, literally in a blink of an eye, I awake in a field about a couple miles away from her house. Just opened my eyes and I'm on my back, in a field, staring at the stars. I stood up and could see her house in the distance. I started calling out hello, but no one was around. I walked at a brisk pace back to her place. I was walking around. Everyone was gone. The lights were all on, but no one was there. I even called out my friend's name outside, but no response. I slip back into the house through the sliding glass door, still calling out. She stumbles out of her room. Tells me everyone went home. She is asleep with her boyfriend in her room, but I'm welcome to crash on her couch. I just sat down, dumbfounded. I kept asking her when everyone left, what was going on. She seemed to have no idea what I was talking about. And then I realized the sun was coming up, and before that it was around 11 p.m. at night, and now it was 5 or 6. I've never been able to put together what happened, where all those hours went, how I ended up so far away in a field. I hadn't done any drugs, maybe just a couple of beers. I was at a sci-fi convention in the late 1980s. A friend of a friend was looking for a said friend. I told him I hadn't seen him recently. He asked if I'd come with him to witness something. I said sure. We went to the hotel room where a bunch of people had gathered. We were to witness some guy levitate. He was a young Indian man in normal clothing, jeans, dress shirt, but barefoot. His assistant started chanting stuff, and soon, the guy in jeans started to go into a trance. He was sitting cross-legged on the bed, but suddenly jerked upright and was sitting in midair about 3 feet above the bed. Then his assistant invited us to check for tricks. We were allowed full access. We could check under, over, or behind him. We could touch him, pull, or push him. There were a few of us in the room. We checked for wires, poles, anything. Me and the friend of a friend tried to push him, first back and forth, and then from below. The Indian man's surface, jeans, shirt, or skin, seemed oddly tense, like thick sculptor's clay instead of cloth or skin. He didn't sway, turn, or vibrate oddly, like if he was on a platform of some kind. I swear we checked all 3 axes for any external support. I already knew various magician levitation tricks, but as far as I could tell, he was using none of them. He was fixed in space. It had to be a trick of some kind, but to this day, I never figured it out. It was explained that he was in a transcendental state of some kind, and there were books and tapes you could purchase to learn more about this type of meditation. This made me further think it was a trick. Nobody can levitate like that. It violates natural Newtonian laws or something. After a rather pushy sales technique, me and the friend of a friend left. We had no money. We talked at great length about it, but to this day, no idea. When I was in middle school, I was a latchkey kid. Working parents, only child, middle class house in the suburbs, about as white bread as you could get. Anyway, this one week in the spring, I suddenly and inexplicably got terrified of the basement. I had no idea why, and it wasn't like I was normally scared of these things. But like 3 to 4 days go by and I'm constantly freaked out because of the basement. It started to affect my sleep. I'd have nightmares, and when I came home from school, I pretty much hide on the opposite side of the house. When I had to go near the cellar door, I'd sprint. Then one night around supper time, my mom asked me to go down to the cellar and grab some potatoes or onions or something. I don't remember what. And I hesitated, and my parents saw me hesitate, and they asked me what was wrong. So I sort of confessed that I had been having creepy dreams about the basement. My parents basically said, "Sure, son, we totally understand." But I could tell they were kind of rolling their eyes. So I sacked up and opened the door, and sitting right on the top step was this huge black cat staring at me. I lost it, shrieked and slammed the door closed, heart hammering from adrenaline. Turns out, my parents had been gardening the weekend before and had left the cellar bulkhead open, leading to an inquisitive neighborhood cat getting stuck down there for like 4 days. Somewhere early on, I had subconsciously noticed something was wrong, but I had no idea what, which led me to slowly lose my shit. Even though I know now it was just a cat, I still get the chills thinking about how freaked out I was those couple days. One night at my family's cabin in West Virginia, my brother and I were sleeping on the porch. From the beds we were in, you could see the rocks on the top of the mountain. There appeared to be somebody on top of the mountain shining a light or a signal mirror down at the valley we were in, and it stopped right on my brother and I. We could hear from all the way in our beds that somebody on the top of the mountain was making a hoot or a fake owl call. Meanwhile, on the gravel road leading up to the house, we could hear footsteps. We ran inside and our parents told us to sleep inside, but that they didn't think anything of it. They thought we were just being kids. The next morning they asked us why we were walking around outside, and when we said that we didn't go outside, they looked worried and said that they also heard footsteps outside. A few years ago, I was home from college for the weekend. The house I grew up in is old, over 100 years, and I've had some experiences there before, paranormal related. This one night is something I will never forget. I'll try to give the shortened version. It was around 11 p.m. and I got back home from visiting my then girlfriend who lived in my hometown. I get in the house and open the door that leads to the upstairs, where all the bedrooms are. Close the door quietly so that I don't wake anyone up and head up to my room. Close the door to my room, sit down at my piano and start playing with headphones in. All of a sudden I get this incredible wave of fear. I feel like something is watching me. Terrified, uncomfortable, shaky. I start looking over my shoulder every few seconds, then I finally decide to just stop playing the piano and go to bed. Turn the lights out, get in bed, and after a few minutes, slam. I hear this loud noise from downstairs. Turn my lights on, and then hear someone walking down the hallway, upstairs, and then going downstairs. I could hear the steps, then the door open and close. I figured my dad went to check the noise out, so I poked my head out of my door. Well, my mom comes walking back upstairs, and the exchange was similar to this. "Did you see what that noise was?" I said. Mom says, "What? Wasn't that you?" "What do you mean?" I said. "That noise was the door slamming shut. Didn't you just get home?" I said, "Nope, I've been home for an hour." All of the other harmless haunting events in my house, this was the first time I ever felt truly terrified. I will never forget the feeling of that irrational fear. I can't even use words to describe the way it felt, but I can seriously relate to the way you felt. And this didn't happen to me, but my sister. She was home alone, and I was out at the mall with a friend. I called her to ask what t-shirt she wanted from the store I was at. She told me she was scared that there was a ghost in the house. I asked what happened. She had put a Hot Pocket in the microwave and gone into her room to change. While she was changing, she heard the microwave go off, signaling that her Hot Pocket was done. We have a small house. The kitchen and living room are open and connected, and her room opens to the living room. She comes out of her room to grab the Hot Pocket, but instead of it being in the microwave, it was out on the living room coffee table, all warmed up. If that happened to me while I was alone, I would have been out of there so fast. I was camping with friends. It was early in the season, and we were the only ones in that section of the park. One morning I stayed in my sleeping bag in the tent while everyone else went to the facilities, which were a bit of a walk away. I dozed off again. I was awoken by someone grabbing my foot through the tent. I was groggy and assumed it was a friend playing a joke, and kicked and said, "Fuck off." My foot was grabbed again and pulled. I kicked again pretty hard, not afraid to kick my friend who was now pissing me off. He stopped and I dozed off again. I woke up again probably less than half an hour later and heard my friends in the distance, returning. When they got back, I asked them who was the one trying to wake me up. They had no idea what I was talking about, honestly. I told them about something grabbing my foot through the tent and thought I was trying to tell a story to scare them. I still have no idea what it was. It wasn't even dark out at the time. When I was 10, my parents and I lived across the street from my grandmother. It was around 8:30 or 9 p.m. It had just been dark for 15 or 20 minutes. I told my mom I was running across the street to my grandmother's house. Instead of going across the street, I walked over to a convenience store about 6 blocks away. On my way back, while devouring a Three Musketeers bar, I was at an intersection. A car, a block away, not a cop, was going through the intersection, and he slammed on his brakes and squealed in reverse and whipped his car around and squealed towards me. At this point it is pitch black and no one is out, and I take off running. Cut between a house and hopped a fence and started down an alley. I see his headlights getting brighter and slow down, and he turns into the alley. I dive down and hide between 2 trash cans while this fucker creeps by at 2 miles an hour. He passes and pulls out of the alley, and I hear his tires squealing, and I'm shaking and paralyzed with fear. After about 20 or 30 seconds, I get my shit together and stand up, make it about 20 feet, and I see his headlights coming into the alley again. This time I was behind someone's detached garage. Looking around the corner of the garage, I see the guy, and although I couldn't make out his face, I could see his head on a swivel, breaking his neck, looking for me. He pulled back out of the alley, and I hopped and went through every person's backyard for 3 blocks until I made it home. part that sucks as an adult and knowing how dangerous that situation is, I didn't tell my parents because I didn't want to get busted for lying. I feel really bad now. Someone should have been notified. The authorities should have definitely been looking for that guy. My cousin and I went to Dallas together, but he had to stay an extra day for work, so I came back to his house on my own. He lives on top of a big hill in a big old house, and it was a bit creepy. I was just lounging around when I hear what sounded like some heavy footsteps running a few steps and suddenly stopping. Holy crap. Had a major freak out. Went to check the doors to make sure they were locked. Front door, locked. Side door, locked. Back door. Oh my god. Not only unlocked but slightly open. I decided to go through the house and found nothing. Closets, under the beds, everywhere. I don't see anything out of the ordinary. Footsteps continued every once in a while. I was pretty sure I was going to die that night, but I didn't. I was a utility locator. I used to work on a team with my dad. To find a gas service from the gas main to the house, you must connect the equipment at the gas meter. Many older homes have the gas meter in the basement. Sometimes I would be the one that would connect the equipment while my dad found the gas service. On this particular day, we get to a house that had the meter in the basement. I go up, knock on the door. The homeowner points me in the direction of the stairs to the basement. I go down and I see the gas meter in the corner with two walls built around it, making it a closet. No door. Behind the gas meter is the old crawl space, halfway up the cinder block wall. No lights in the crawl space. As I step into the closet area, I hear what I can only describe as a demonic growl come from the crawl space. I step out, call my dad. Not wanting to sound spooked, I just say I need a flashlight. He hung up, stood outside the doorway and just reached in to hook up the equipment. My dad comes down the stairs with the flashlight. As he steps through the door to see if I got it in the dark, that same demonic growl comes from the crawl space. He about knocked me over trying to get back. He hands me the flashlight and goes back outside. I just stood there pointing the flashlight into the crawl space with the feeling something was watching me. He calls and says he's done. Grabbed the equipment as quickly as possible and got the fuck out. Don't know what it was, but it wasn't a dog or raccoon or anything I've ever heard before or since. "10 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I was in bed petting my very bossy cat, who had pushed my bedroom open only a few minutes prior, when I saw my dad. The entry to the kitchen is just that, an entrance, and there is no door. I saw him in his oversized black shorts and miscellaneous old t-shirt across the kitchen entryway. First I thought, why the fuck is he not at work? And then I realized he wasn't wearing his glasses, which led me to think he must be sick. So I get up despite my dighead cat's nasty face and walk into the kitchen to ask him if he's feeling okay. No one was there. No one was home. All the doors were still locked. I wasn't afraid, but turning that corner expecting to see a person and seeing nothing but a bright empty room was very creepy. I was home alone once at age of 7-ish. Swear I hear somebody calling my name, over and over. I was freaked out because I knew I was home alone, and yet I kept hearing it. Just faintly, like an echo of a whisper. It gnawed at my sanity and I was truly scared. Next day I find out my grandpa had been riding over to my house on his four-wheeler and fallen off, breaking his hip. Knowing I was the only person home, he called my name all day. Gramps wasn't discovered until late that night when my parents came home. To this day, I haven't told anyone that I heard him all along. Moral: if you think you're hearing your name being called, don't ignore it. Somebody might need help. That's a lot more likely than a phantom whispering in your ear. Thought I was hearing voices. I was scared all day. It turned out to be my grandpa calling for help. When I was younger, about 7, I was home alone and I heard the door open. My parents had gone out to celebrate a birthday with a few friends, and I wasn't allowed to go. My older sisters were at a sleepover. I assumed it was my parents getting home and I ran to the door, but nobody was in the house after a thorough search. I then heard the back door to the house open and a man yell, "Hurry, get the hell out." I really didn't understand what was going on at the moment, so I just closed the doors and locked them. After my parents got home, my mom and dad accused me of taking their money they had stashed away and asking me what I did with a few different things. After I told them what happened, they didn't believe me until they saw that the hallway downstairs leading to our back door had muddy boot prints. They called the cops and freaked out. I live in a small house next to my father's home, which is in the middle of the woods in Norway. Even though I'm 18 years old, it can be quite scary being completely alone sometimes, especially after dark. This incident happened some time ago, about 1 year or so. It was well over midnight and I was just about to go to sleep, eyelids closed. I'd been lying in bed for a while. Unfortunately, there was no sleep to come because I suddenly heard an ominous scream outside. It was extremely loud. It almost sounded like it was directly over my house. It was indescribably scary. The scream was something straight out of a horror movie, like a blend between an animal and a human in pain. The freakiest part was that I could hear the sound moving through the air above me from one point to another. Believe me, it was as fast as lightning and gone before I knew it. The suddenness scared me shitless. It was so unexpected. I stayed up all night with the lights on. The day after the incident, I spoke to my father about it. It turned out that he had heard it too. He even rushed to the window to see what was going on outside. None of us have a clue of what the hell that scream was about. There was some kind of relief knowing that I wasn't the only one experiencing it. We even joked about it being a witch flying through the air. But all jokes and speculations aside, I hope I never hear something like that ever again. I still have trouble sleeping sometimes. Buried by now, but here it is. Had a veteran female Marine in my anatomy class that was having problems with what she assumed was a stalker. She had a guy from a town about 40 minutes away come set up her computer and debug it. The guy is bragging about how he's ex-military intelligence, blah blah. She thinks nothing of it. Gets her computer set up. All is fine. Mind you, she's a fairly attractive single woman and a mother of 4. Her house is huge and has a pretty good alarm system installed, including a motion sensor camera. The alarm system also gives her updated lists of which doors have been opened and the times. She's at home alone one morning, getting ready for class, and hears what she thinks is a door slamming. She has several firearms, so she loaded one and checked the house. Nothing. She leaves, sets the alarm, and doesn't think anything of it. Just thought she's going nuts from the stress. Leaves the house and gets a notification on her phone that after she left, the alarm was deactivated within the grace period of 60 seconds or so, reset, and that the front door was open and closed. She realized she wasn't hearing things and called the police and the alarm company. They came, searched the house, and came up with nothing. Fast forward a week later, the alarm is still acting up. Cops have been called a second time, and her neighbor has helped her search the house. She asked me while in class to come home with her and search the house with a gun. I agree. On the way there, the alarm is being weird. Get to the house, load 2 guns, start downstairs and work our way up. We get upstairs and I ask her if she's ever checked the attic. She says no. My adrenaline is pumping as we open the crawl space door. I climb up first, not knowing what or who I'll find. We look around with guns and flashlights pointed around. We see footprints in the soft, billowy insulation leading to a far corner with a blind spot. We walked over to check, and no one was there. Climbed down from the attic and shut the door. She recognizes that sound as the sound she heard the first morning when she was home alone. We go downstairs to chill out and wait for her kids to get home. I then notice the doggy door on her back door. I ask her if it locks and she says yeah. I inspect it to find the lock can be unlocked easily by sliding a key across the latch. The person has been entering and exiting through the doggy door. We left immediately to go buy a new door and come back to install it. After leaving, she got an update that the doors from the garage into the house and out the back door had been triggered in the grace period. They had been hiding in the garage while we were in the house. Installed the new door and the problem ceased. Scary shit. I was 18 at the time and I recently got a new job working in an old Freemason bar. It was like my 20th shift and my manager had to leave early and he left me with the keys to lock up. I locked all the doors and went around turning off all the lights upstairs and went back to the bar to cash up. While I'm cashing up, I hear a massive crash in the kitchen, so I go and investigate and nothing seemed out of the order. I went back to the bar and see two gentlemen sitting at the bar. I was a little taken aback to see them, but I thought nothing of it and poured them both a drink. I then bent down to clean the glasses out of the glass cleaning machine, and when I come back up, the gentlemen had disappeared, but their beers remained untouched in their glasses. I think not much of it, and just assumed they left. The two things that really got to me were when I went to leave, the front door was locked from when I locked it earlier in the night, as well as the other doors. And when I told my manager, he explained how the last person who worked on the bar claimed they were pushed down the stairs while they were alone. So in his words, the spirits here must like you. I swear this is no bullshit. It was 2 a.m. and I was bored. So I went out to this park a bit out of town to go biking. For the most part, it was surrounded by trees and at all ends with a running/biking track that goes around the park. The park was lined with streetlights though, so you could vaguely see. I've been going there for a few times that week around this time because it unwinded me and felt good at that outside. But this time when I was making my rounds, I see 4 fucking 6-year-old looking figures come out of the forest. It was about 4 to 7 of them, I don't remember. These little things didn't have a parent with them, all seemingly stayed silhouetted. I was kind of biking in their general direction when they started fucking coming towards me. Thankfully I was around 200 feet away from them, but I could make out them, and the spooky little shits were coming. I don't think I biked faster in my entire life. I literally became Lance Armstrong with an extra testicle for a good 3 minutes, charging it home. It was unexplainable. I've been alone and haven't seen a single person all the times I went. I haven't gone since, needless to say. One time when I was about 12, my best friend at the time and I were having a sleepover at her house. As a visual, the house was pretty old and was filled with tons of antiques and old furniture. She lived at her grandmother's house. The basement was one of those ones where you wouldn't dare go down into alone because it just felt spooky. Because we were spooked by the basement, we decided it would be fun to sleep in a very long hallway on the 3rd floor, on opposite sides of the hall for some reason. The whole night before bed we were playing a game where we were spies, so we would hide in the closets and sneak up on her mom and grandma. I was often homesick at sleepovers as a kid, and when it was bedtime, I just read my book by a nightlight on my end of the hall. Then, right across from me, I see my friend get up and run towards me. Innocent me says, "Are we playing spies again?" No response. So I just giggle and I'm excited to play again. so I followed the figure into a bedroom closet and closed the door. Trying to communicate, but she's not answering. I look over to where she is supposed to be beside me, but no one is there. I decide to leave the closet because I couldn't fathom what was happening. I walk across the long hall and saw that she was fast asleep the whole time. I could never sleep there again, and I'm still really spooked by the fact that I ran into a closet with a mysterious figure. There's an abandoned complex a few miles away from my tiny isolated town. It's been abandoned for quite some time after it caught fire. I've not yet come across a definitive answer as to what it was used for. I've heard it was once a mental institution. It was an old army barracks. It was once a boarding school, so who knows? But that's irrelevant. So I've spent time there alone too many times to count. I like the solitude of sitting on one of the many rooftops while strumming my backpacker's acoustic guitar. There is one main building, another that seems like a housing building, a water storage, and 3 oddly shaped buildings that range from around 20 to 30 feet wide. Here's one of those buildings. Inside, it's all steel besides the plank wooden floors. So I was at mid-level in the pictured structure, making my way to the top. Beautiful day out. Then I grabbed the handrail, and at the bottom of the final stairway to the top, before I heard a little girl's voice. She sounded about 5 years old. She sounded as if she'd been there for days without food and water. The voice sounded weak, and as though she needed to muster all her courage just to utter one word. Mother. It sounded like she was calling out as her arm was outstretched, hoping to be rescued. It's funny because I'd gone there a handful of times alone after sundown to explore deep into the darkness of the main building, plus all the others. But on that day the sun was high and bright. Birds were singing their songs. I looked forward to a rooftop view of the tundra and wilderness after I'd walked for an hour and a half to get there. I wasn't expecting anything. Then suddenly I hear her faint voice and I hit a brick wall. She sounded weak, but it was her weakness that terrified me into a motionless grown man. All I could feel was tingles pulsating down my spine. Had she sounded like a normal, healthy little girl and uttered more than one simple word, I'd have run up to see if she needed help. But no, I stood motionless for what seemed like a minute, then turned around and left. I've had a handful of other experiences, but this one is the one that terrified me. I've got one. In college, I worked security for extra money. One of my regular assignments was the overnight shift at a metal fabrication factory. One of the primary reasons I was there was to ensure that no one broke in to steal all the valuable metal that was stocked on site, which was an occasional problem. That, in turn, involved checking the perimeter fence for damage at least once a shift. That couldn't be done effectively by camera. It instead required physically walking the fence. So it was that one night I was walking the perimeter fence in the middle of a thunderstorm. My attention was on the beam of my flashlight illuminating the fence as I walked past. So I wasn't really focused on where I was walking, despite walking through grass that was a bit over my waist. Apparently I just stepped awkwardly on a patch of particular slick grass or mud as I was heading downhill, but before I knew what was happening, I had slid feet first into an open storm sewer. Some asshole had stolen the manhole cover recently, and the edges around the opening were wet with rain and mud thanks to the storm. Let me just take a moment to explain the storm sewer. First off, it was shaped like an obolite. If you're not familiar with what that is, picture a concrete cell that is shaped like a jug. Small opening at the top with the sides that slope inward to prevent someone from crawling out. In this case, the bottom was maybe 10 foot square, and the opening for the manhole was about twice the normal width in the center of the ceiling. There was no ladder attached, and the fall was maybe 20 feet down. At the bottom of the floor was sloped to form two trenches in the shape of a cross. There were sewer channels going off in 4 directions, but they were only maybe a foot wide across and were blocked with metal grates. At the bottom, there were debris, including a number of large broken pieces of rebar. There were several pieces that were pointing straight up. I definitely would have impaled myself on several jagged points of rusty metal had I hit the bottom, so no way to escape. A long fall and a probable disabling injury at the bottom. I somehow caught myself by hooking the edge of the opening on my elbows as I fell in. I dropped my flashlight to the bottom of the pit before I stopped my momentum, so I had a great view of all that broken rebar below me as I was struggling to escape. Maybe that was the collapsed remains of a ladder? As I tried to get another handhold, my cell phone skipped out of my pocket and hit the bottom. It felt like forever before I somehow pulled myself out of that opening. I don't doubt adrenaline gave me a considerable boost of strength, but even so, I nearly lost my hold on the edge 3 times before I managed to scramble out. I was kind of just jerking my knees towards the opening and jumping a couple of inches thanks to momentum. My free hand kept scrambling for something solid to grab, but I never really found anything. I'm honestly not sure how exactly I pulled myself out, just using the surface tension between the mud and concrete and my hands and forearm. It felt like a miracle. All I could think of after I pulled myself out was how I wasn't due to be relieved for another 7 hours. 7 hours before anyone would even start wondering where I was. And that whole time I might have been trapped at the bottom of the pit, impaled on some rods of rebar in the rain. I also wanted to kill whoever stole that manhole cover. On April 18th of this year, I came home from work and began working on some homework. After 30 minutes of homework, my aunt entered my mother's bedroom and began screaming hysterically, ordering me to call 911. Once I was on the line with the operator, she asked what the nature of the emergency was. I didn't quite know, so I entered my mother's bedroom to find her dead of a heart attack and laying face down on the floor, wedged between her nightstand and her bed. The operator dispatched the paramedics and instructed me on how to perform CPR. In order to do so, I had to flip my mother onto her back. When I grabbed my mother's cold, lifeless arm, I realized that she couldn't be moved as she was wedged firmly between her bed and her nightstand, and rigor mortis had already set in. I was unable to flip her over, and I had never seen or touched a dead body before. After the paramedics came and told me that nothing could be done, the medical examiner informed my family that she couldn't be seen as she had been laying on her face for so long. It's assumed by my family that she hit her head on the way down as her dentures were on the floor beside her. The combination of her head trauma and the fact that she had been dead for many hours had rendered her unviewable as deemed by the officer from the medical examiner's office. To answer your question, the sight and feeling of my mother's deceased body is the most chilling thing that I have ever seen. Her memorial is this Sunday. When I was a child, my grandparents' house always creeped me out. I was terrified of the basement, and there was something off about the rest of the house. Once when I was 10, my mom and I were sleeping in my grandpa's bed. Couldn't sleep, and I was facing the middle of the bed, so the back of my head was near the space between the bed and the wall and window. All of a sudden, I feel something poke the back of my head twice. I was petrified and froze, so I never turned my head to see what was poking me. To this day, I don't know what could have happened, but I can still feel those pokes. I haven't told this one in a while. I was young, 5 to 7, somewhere in there. I was sleeping in between my parents for whatever reason. I woke up. I remember the clock reading around 4 a.m. There was something standing by the window, looking out into the front yard. It Looked like a man in a brown wool robe, about 6'4" or so. I started to stir and sat up in bed, and the thing turned and looked at me. Dear God, that face. Extremely pale white skin, lots of really pronounced wrinkles. The face drooped like it was melting, down into a really pointy chin, almost similar to a scream mask but with all the features of a living being. Its mouth was hanging open and its eyes were wide, almost like it was worried or frightened. It kept its gaze on me while it moved away from the window in front of the bed and out the open bedroom door. The second it exited the room, the lights turned on their own. Both of my parents jumped up on either side of me, breathing heavily, like they'd both just woken up from a nightmare. To be clear, I was fully able to move during this. I don't think it was sleep paralysis, but I'm not sure what it could have been other than some kind of demon or really fucking ugly ghost. Never seen it since, but I can still picture it clear as day. I had an experience which may or may not be similar. When I was 5 to 7 years old, I lived in a huge rural house in South Korea. The house had a courtyard, and the street outside was barely lit. It was nighttime, and I was the last one to get groceries out of the trunk. I walked through the gate, locked it, and walked to the front door of the house. Suddenly, I got this chill that ran through my spine, and I turned backwards, instinctively. I can't really explain what I saw. There was a glowing bright blue, human-shaped figure floating in the middle of the courtyard, and it was slowly floating closer. Got this jolt I'm pretty sure is associated with primal fear. I wrenched open the door, locked it fast, ran to the living room, and played with my Lego like nothing was wrong. That night I had a weird dream. My mother was missing. I was looking for her in desperation. Found a door embedded in a hill. Something was off about the door, so I opened it. Blasted open and hellish things poured out, talking like Silent Hill level shit. It may not be creepy typing it out, but the memory of that night is burned into my mind. My mom was fine when I woke up. On a side note, I'm also very prone to sleep paralysis. I have episodes where I wake up in sleep paralysis 3 to 4 times a week that last a month. Then I'll be free for half a year or so. My friends joke that I'm haunted. Haha. I was out at our cabin in the remote mountainous wilderness of Colorado with my dad and had to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. This necessitated a flashlight and shoes because the outhouse was far away. There was no one but me and my dad for miles in any direction, so I thought. Suddenly heard voices in the distance and stopped in my tracks. It seemed to be coming from my right, deep in the woods, in the middle of nowhere, a quarter of the mile from the road. Being 11 and unafraid of the world, I foolishly yelled, "Who's out there?" There was silence for a few seconds. Then a shouted string of profanities so vulgar it terrified my virgin ears. I stood shocked still for a moment like a terrified rabbit, but I heard nothing else. So I ran back to the house and woke my dad up. He got up, loaded his gun, and turned all the lights on, but we never heard another sound. To this day, we have not seen or heard another person within 15 miles of the cabin. I was young, maybe 8. Just so you know, I always go to sleep in my bed and I never, ever fall asleep on the couch. Grandpa died and we got back from his funeral. That night I went to bed, in my room as usual, but I woke up in the middle of the night on the living room couch. When I looked up, I saw my grandpa's ghost. It wasn't scary or anything. At the time it felt natural. He didn't say anything, but there was this understanding between us. I went back to my room and went back to sleep. I would have assumed it was a dream, but it was so vivid and real that it stuck with me for years, especially since I woke up on the couch, which made the moment stick out even more in my mind. It wasn't even a "I saw a ghost" moment. It was just a weird, vivid memory that seemed so normal at the time that I didn't think anything strange of it. When I was about 20, I told my mom that story and she said, "Was it the day of his funeral? Because I saw his ghost that night too." So a friend of my family is very wealthy and has a big house that we all affectionately call the castle. Now it's no mansion, but from my low state of living it seemed like it. Somewhere between 6 to 8 rooms, a pool, 2 living rooms, giant basement filled with a flat screen and pool tables and all that. My friend and I would always crash in the basement when we stayed over. Now it was close to Halloween time, so we just finished watching a scary movie and were called upstairs for dinner. I just finished taking a particularly nasty dump, so I closed the bathroom door and ate like usual. When we came back down to the basement, the bathroom door was open. Because it was so close to Halloween, we all got spooked and ran upstairs telling my mom. Close the door and it's open. So spooky, I know. But her response was, "Oh, that's just Beacom," and told us his story. Beacom is the house owner's brother, imaginary friend from when they were kids. They made sure to emphasize that it was friendly, but whenever something moves, or doors open or close, they just blame Beacom and laugh it off. So my friend and I went back downstairs terrified, and for the rest of the night, kept watching all the doors to see if anything was different. Sure enough, if we ever both left the basement, when we came back, one of the 3 downstairs doors was open. We got into the habit of closing them all. My mom tried to scare us once with the wolf mask, which was more funny than anything. But anyway, as we were going to sleep, there are 2 half windows. I say half because they are small and lead outside, while we are underground, if that makes sense, and 2 couches. I lay on one and my friend lays on the other. From the way we were laying, we could each see one of the windows. On my window is a white face. It's very dark and hard to see, but it looks like 3 black holes on a white field that might just happen to make a face. But when I get up to look closer, it moves away, almost like it's more of a reflection of light than anything else. I deliberately didn't tell my friend about it because we had enough fear for one day. So 2 years or so later, we are all talking about the scariest thing that ever happened to us. Of course, Beacom gets brought into the situation. I'm listening to my friend tell the story, and he ends with, "Yeah, that night scared the shit out of me. I never told you this, but when we were sleeping, I saw this super creepy white face looking at me through the window. But we could only see different windows. I lost my shit and was never more creeped out. It's been some time since we've been to the castle, but that story will always spook me." Was about 5 or 6. One of my parents and I were watching TV in the living room of our ranch-style house in the suburbs in the Midwest. A strange light coming from the hallway got our attention. In the bedroom at the end of the hall, there was a 1 by 1 foot glowing orb of light floating about 3 to 4 feet from the floor, illuminating the dark room. The orb seemed to realize it was being observed and moved very quickly, and before we knew it, the orb was outside like it had passed through the wall or windows. It then went very quickly around the house, jumping or passing through 2 6-foot fences in a matter of seconds. We saw it do this through the windows, and our dog started freaking out. My dad freaks out and grabs his revolver and a flashlight and storms outside. It had rained recently and there was mud outside, but no evidence of footprints or anything to rationally explain it. While the event is a family legend now, my mom thought it was a ghost or spirit. My dad thought it was aliens, and quite frankly, I have no idea. I leaned towards ball lightning, but it seemed to have at least some level of intelligence and seemed to make deliberate, not random movements. The house I grew up in during a large portion of my childhood was built sometime in the 1930s. It was pretty big, which was great for a kid like me who loved to explore. Problem was that all throughout the house I would routinely get this creepy vibe, like as if someone were watching me, or this overwhelming feeling that I wasn't safe and needed to leave particular areas. Now it could have just been an overactive imagination. Kids are definitely prone to having those. Problem was I wasn't exposed to scary movies or stories as a kid. I think my parents recognized how scared I would get by my own imagination. I couldn't imagine how bad it could be to actually hear or see something. Still, even as an adult now looking back, there are 2 particular events which I can't possibly explain as being irrational. Both of them involved the basement, which I'll mention was primarily unfinished. To give a quick layout of it, Basement was accessible through the kitchen or the main hallway and was adjacent to the side door. It was unfinished with hard concrete floors and an area in the back that was mostly dirt. Going down the basement meant you had to take these wooden steps which had probably been there since the 30s. The first incident was on a weekend. My dad and I were sitting in the living room watching NASCAR. During a commercial break, he asked me to get him a beer. Unfortunately for me, he kept his beer down in the basement in this little mini fridge. I was already kind of scared of going down there. Not wanting to upset him by telling him no, I went for it anyway. Before I even made it to the steps, I was already getting that feeling that I shouldn't go any further, and that I should immediately turn around, but I kept going on. As I got to the basement steps, that fear continued to grow and grow. You know that feeling when you just can tell that someone is staring at you? Like a fifth sense, your spine gets kind of tingly and you have this overwhelming feeling to look at in the direction. That's what I was experiencing tenfold. When I finally reached the bottom of the steps, I was almost completely paralyzed with fear. I slowly turned my head to the left towards where the open dirt area was, said hello. As soon as I said that, two red glowing orb things emerged from that dark part. I'd say they were eyes, but I can't be for sure. I didn't study them long enough before I ran up the steps as fast as I could. My dad must have heard my running and met me in the hallway and asked me what was going on. I told him about what I saw, and he immediately headed down there. I think he might have thought it was an animal or something, but after a few minutes he emerged with the beer in hand and telling me it was nothing. The second event took place a year, maybe a year and a half later. It was during the summer. My family and I were outside. Dad, mom, younger brother, and myself. I had to use the bathroom and headed inside using the front door, as I had refused to use the side door since that previous event. When I went to go back outside though, I had the thought I'd try and be brave and face my fear. I headed towards the side door and sat at the top of the basement steps and waited. It didn't take me long for me to get those same feelings all over again. I shouldn't be there. Something was watching me. I needed to leave immediately. I was truly tired of that fear though. I wanted to be brave and face whatever threat was down there, so I stayed. It didn't take long for me to run though, because as soon as I had made that determination, I saw a shadow paint across the wall opposite of the handrail. It was human, looked male, seemed extremely large. No real fine details. Again, not enough time as I immediately bolted out the door. I told my dad about it. This time he seemed a bit more concerned. I didn't follow him into the house, but I did hear him racking his gun before he descended down. Just like last time though, he emerged, nothing to be found. There were other events, but those were the two primary ones. Still have nightmares about that place too. They were always so odd too. Before they involved me being inside the house already and going down to the basement to face whatever was down there. That's ended though. Now I'm always outside the house. The weather is odd, like it's not sure if it wants to be night or daytime. I had this feeling like I need to go in the house and explore it further. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Till this day, I don't know if they were a series of fucked up dreams or if it was reality. But when I was around 6 or 7, my family and I lived in a 2-story house with all the bedrooms upstairs. My mom would always send me in her room to collect nappies. My brother had just been born. And of course, my parents' room was at the very end of the hallway. I remember I had this distinct feeling that I could never recall. I just knew it when I felt it. The feeling was a warning sign that it was coming. Don't ask what the fuck it was, because I had no clue. When it was coming, I would get comfortable, lie on the bed or sit down, and close my eyes. I had to close my eyes though. Under no circumstances were they to be open. It felt like it was forbidden to look at it. It was like a set of rules that I had to follow or else something would happen. And I was too scared to question it. It would slowly come in. The feeling would grow as it got closer. And it would come from the hallway through the door. It felt like it was floating because I could never hear footsteps. it would literally just talk to me. Like, that's it. The subject would range from small talk to something extremely creepy, my mother's death. It would usually ask me questions like, how was your day? But I would never answer because, again, I was scared to death. At this point, I would wait and listen until I couldn't feel its presence anymore. Only then would it be safe to open my eyes and move. It was weird because I seemed to forget the experience until the next one. After it left, I would just continue on with what I was doing like nothing had happened. The only time I'd actually acknowledge it was when the feeling would wash over me and I'd realize that I fucked up by being alone. I really don't remember much. That one nappy experience always stood out though. Everything would kind of blur together. Pretty much all my memories are like that. I only remember my thoughts and feelings at the time. I don't even know. I was 8 years old and my cousin was turning 8 the next month. This occurred in early August. To add some context to this event, my family owned land. A few of my uncles built their houses on their property, including my dad. My dad's house and my uncle's house are about 130 meters apart, and in the evening, the farm lights light up the dirt path between their houses. The event. I remember this evening so clearly. It was a warm evening. The sun had just set. The evening was calm, no wind or inclement weather. My cousin and I were walking back to my dad's house. We're talking, and as we come about 50 meters close to my dad's house, the blinding white light flashed twice. We both just stood there. We were both silent, standing there. We both looked at each other and said, "Did that just happen?" We both freaked out and ran the rest of the 50 meters back to my house. We, both very excited by this event, told my parents and his dad what happened outside, but nobody witnessed this. As the curtains were closed inside, none of the adults believed us. They said nothing, just kind of acknowledged us and continued visiting. The light wasn't accompanied with thunder because it wasn't lightning. The light was blinding. The acreage is located in the prairies. I don't know if there's any logical explanation for this event, but ever since then, I've always believed that maybe, just maybe, it was aliens or some astronomical event. I know this sounds absolutely ridiculous to some people, but my cousin and I don't try to convince other people of what we experienced, because we both know what we experienced. I was about 7 and my brother was 13, and we still shared a room. I was always afraid of the dark when I was a kid. Periodically I would wake up in the middle of the night, call for mom to come and turn on the hall light, be used as a nightlight, much to the enjoyment of my brother. One night, in the middle of winter, I woke up, and right before I called out for mom, I noticed there was a man on the deck that was on the other side of the wall from our bedroom. I froze. I was totally freaked and tried to scream, but I could only make this high-pitched squeaking sound. The only thing I could do was cry. After what seemed like hours, my dad heard me and came in to see what was wrong. The man was gone, of course, when I told him, and he blew it off as a nightmare until my brother, from under his covers, said he saw it too. With that, my dad went outside with the shotgun. There were footprints in the snow outside our window, and the window of my parents' bedroom. That one took a while to recover from. I grew up in rural Scotland in the 80s and 90s. I think 50 kids total in my entire primary school, rural. There were only 4 kids in my year, one being me, so only 3 classmates. I was told that before we moved into the house I grew up in, the previous owner died of old age in our living room, and they lived in my bedroom before that. There was some kind of raised wooden floor built for them to live and die on, with a bed that was taken out when we got there. The events as follows. I don't remember this, but my mom claims she couldn't find me when I was a toddler, and later found me in a closed drawer in my room. No idea how I got in there, no idea how it was closed. I have a distant memory of seeing a dog-like ghost running in place in broad daylight in our living room. Mum had me hide behind the couch with her suddenly because the coal man was here to collect money we owed him. We were extremely poor and had a coal fire to keep us warm in the winter, but I didn't know why we were hiding at first. I peeked into the living room from behind the couch and saw what was like a standing shadow, but it was made of light running on the spot in front of the fireplace. It was like a dog running really quickly, but it was running in place, subtly switching side to side every few seconds like it's glitching out. I thought that was why my mom had me hide behind the couch. I got scared and went and stopped looking into the living room, hiding behind the couch fully again. It stuck with me as a "what the F was that I saw" moment, but seeing as I barely made primary school age back then, I can't really give it any real weight as paranormal evidence to myself. My room had a lot of things fall over in it that shouldn't, and never with anyone there to do it. Every now and then we'd hear a loud bang come from my upstairs room while we were all downstairs and something had fallen over. Usually small things like books, games, etc., but I had a mirror smashed from falling on the floor. The worst was my entire wardrobe fell over and broke my bed. The wardrobe was really big and heavy and shouldn't have been able to fall forward on its own like that. It scared the shit out of all of us from the boom alone. Thought we had a robber up there. A few family members told me they thought I was in my room and were surprised to see I wasn't because they saw my door in a later stage of closing as they went by, as though someone had gone in there and had been closing the door behind them. And a family member saw the last seconds of the door moving to a close. I never witnessed this, but it was unsettling to hear about. I remember that when us kids were left in the house alone, which happened fairly often, we'd hear very audible footsteps and banging coming from the rooms upstairs, but it usually came from my bedroom. I had sleep paralysis a lot when I lived there. I'd scream really loud and freak everyone out. Typically sleep paralysis episodes. I think I'm awake but I can't move, and it's like something evil is in my room with me with the intent to kill me, and I have to fight it off or I'll die type feeling. If you've never had one, feel lucky. They fucking suck. I went into detail over what I saw and felt during sleep paralysis. This post would be a lot bigger, so I don't want to. Every now and then a really loud bang would wake me up, as though someone had wrapped their knuckles on something wooden near my head with a lot of force. This has followed me everywhere since, but doesn't happen quite as often. I think it's exploding head syndrome, but it's still not a nice way to wake up. Bonus spooky story. My stepdad and mom both had the same dream when they were abducted by a UFO. My stepdad was telling my mom about this crazy dream that he had a UFO came and the roof went see-through and he was taken aboard. Mom went pale and said she had the same dream. My younger sisters shared a room and they were both freaked out and said they'd woken up to their blankets on the floor, thought it was ghosts. I didn't have a UFO dream or wake up with my blankets off of me, so I guess my haunted bedroom saved me there. Super bonus story. When I was a young teen, I was at this tiny river beach with a good friend of mine late at night, drinking by a little campfire we made because it's Scotland, and that's what we do. We were waiting on another friend coming. We were having a laugh talking about shit when we hear these very heavy footsteps come toward us. Cool, we thought. It's the friend we're waiting on, but he never appears. I think he's fucking with us, so we call out his name but no answer. We get up and wander out in the darkness and can't see anyone. Literally seconds have passed. No way in hell anyone was right there then left in that time without us hearing or seeing them. Still think our friend is fucking with us, and we decide that he must be hiding a bit further down the trail to get to the river. We actually walked all the way back to the start of the trail, a good quarter-mile back from the river where we meet our friend, now only just arriving on his push bike with no clue what we're on about when we tell him that it was a good joke. I swear blind someone was right next to us. We both heard it. It doesn't help that the section of the river we were drinking on has stupid Scottish folk legends about a stupid ghost who haunts it because they drowned. I don't believe the ghost story, but do personally know of people who have actually drowned in the river. I left home a long time ago now, and things like that don't happen anymore, except for the still having sleep paralysis episodes and a loud bang waking me up from time to time, but by far less than when I lived at home. Surprisingly, I'm actually fairly skeptical about the paranormal. It does interest me, but I think that most things can be explained rationally. Used to live in a shady part of Indianapolis, in the same house where my mother grew up. We lived by a wooded area, not very vast forest, but thick until it led out to some fields. I have many peculiar tales from the woods, here the most memorable. I had a friend over when I was about 3rd grade. She and I considered ourselves professional survivors and trained ourselves for a zombie apocalypse out in these woods. This girl was also a horror movie junkie. We were out in the woods when we heard a chainsaw. Nothing to be alarmed about. This was a nice fall day and people were probably tending to their yard. Then I realized we were in the middle of these woods, and the chainsaw noise is coming closer. We noped out of there pretty fast. The second was with a different neighborhood friend, and we were exploring when suddenly we smelled something rancid. We looked down and a huge mound of dead fish was sitting in a clearing, with a few dirty paper plates and plastic forks scattered around. Later that day we found bags, and in the bags were a large variety of possum bones. Finally was the time we found a dead body at our school, which had a track surrounded by thin woods. We were walking around the track for gym, when I turned and saw the body. Can't describe it as human. It had blue skin and bulging black eyes. It was half buried in the mud, facing me, with an egg-shaped head. I noped out of there, turned back to see a group of kids gathering around, and our principal peering through the trees. We were rushed back inside. The police were called. The next day the body was gone, and no investigation was taking place. Since I was born, up to when I was around 18, I could see and feel things that no one around me would. My parents discovered that I had a weird power of sensing things that they couldn't, but knew I was right. They tried to force me into believing that the things I saw or sensed were just my imagination. We lived in my aunt's house for a few months when I was around 7. Her room door, which didn't have an actual door, but the space where the door would go, was across from my aunt's room door. I could see my aunt's bed, where she was sleeping with her husband, from my bed, where I was sleeping with my parents. It was about 2 a.m. when I started hearing a noise that sounded just like an airplane that is going to land, because it kept getting louder and closer. I woke up my parents because the noise was getting too loud. They said they don't hear anything and got upset at me for waking them up. So they moved their heads to where their feet were and told me not to wake them again. At that point I got really scared because I could hear this loud noise and all I can hug is my parents' feet. Suddenly a bright light lightens up my aunt's bedroom, but the light would only light their bedroom. It would not light any other part of the house. I could hear the airplane hovering outside my aunt's bedroom. We lived on a 2nd floor. Scared of the situation and to wake up my parents, I decided to close my eyes. Next thing I see when I open my eyes is this white transparent person-shaped thing walk past to my aunt and sits on the edge of their bed, waking her up but not her husband. She then sits up on the bed and they start having a conversation. I could hear them talking, but I couldn't hear what they were saying clearly. After a few minutes, the thing walked to the window, which had iron bars for security, and walked through it. My aunt went back to sleep. The lights from outside turned off, and the hovering airplane noise started sounding like it was going away. The next day, while we were all having lunch, my aunt mentioned that Anthony, her brother / my uncle, that I was named after, that died of a brain tumor when I was 1 year old, came to visit her one last time, to tell her that he will not visit her anymore, because he was going on a long journey.